Imagine you are standing in a hallway at 2 in the morning, and a stranger is sitting on the floor outside your door, so broken he cannot find the words to explain why. You do not know him. You do not know what happened to him. You do not know what he lost, or what he did, or what kind of man he was before whatever it was that turned him into this. This person who folds himself against a wall in the dark and looks at you like you are the first real thing he has seen in years. And something in you recognizes something in him, not his pain specifically, but the shape of it. The way a person carries a wound they have decided never to speak about. The way they build an entire life around the edges of a hole they refuse to look into directly. You tell yourself you will not get involved. You tell yourself you understand the rules. You tell yourself that you are smarter than this, more careful than this, too self-aware to fall into exactly the thing you can already see coming. And then you fall anyway. Because that is what ugly love is about. Not the falling is easy. The falling is always easy. But the cost of falling for someone who has decided, with everything they have, that they will never let themselves be caught. This is Colleen Hoover at her most raw, at her most honest about the way desire and damage find each other in the dark and make arrangements that daylight would never approve. It is not a comfortable book. It was never meant to be. It was meant to be true. Who was Colleen Hoover when she wrote this book? By 2014, when Ugly Love was published, Hoover had already established herself as one of the most emotionally uncompromising voices in contemporary romance. She had proven that she was not interested in the sanitized version of love, the version where desire is clean and commitment arrives naturally, and nobody has to excavate their own damage before they can be present for another person. She was interested in the other version, the version most people actually live. Ugly Love came from a specific creative question Hoover was sitting with. What happens when two people enter a relationship with eyes completely open, both of them knowing it cannot become what they secretly need it to be, and both of them choosing to proceed anyway? Not out of naivety, not out of denial, but out of something more complicated and more honest than either of those things. Out of longing so acute it overrides every sensible instinct. She has spoken about how the book explores the difference between what we say we want and what we actually want, the gap that opens between our stated terms and our lived experience, and how we pretend not to notice it widening until it swallows us entirely. She wrote it quickly, with urgency, the way books sometimes arrive when the idea is pressing against the inside of the writer's chest and needs to get out. The result is a novel that feels less like a constructed narrative and more like something confessed, something handed to the reader still warm. Let us enter the world of the book. We meet Tate Collins as she arrives in San Francisco to move in with her brother Corbin, a pilot, while she completes her nursing degree. She is practical, focused, clear about what she wants from this chapter of her life. She has a plan. The plan does not include the man she finds unconscious in the hallway outside Corbin's apartment at 2 in the morning. His name is Miles Archer. He is also a pilot, Corbin's colleague, his neighbor, and in one of those arrangements that life assembles with apparent indifference to your better judgment, a permanent fixture in the building where Tate is now going to live. Miles Archer is beautiful. That is the first thing. The kind of beautiful that registers before thought does, before caution does, before you have decided whether or not to allow it. And then, when he is sober and daylight has arrived and he is functional again, he is something more complicated than beautiful. He is present and absent simultaneously. Warm in the way of someone who has carefully calibrated exactly how warm they are willing to be, and then built a wall at that exact temperature beyond which nothing and no one is permitted. Tate is drawn to him the way most people are drawn to the thing that is worst for them, not blindly, not stupidly, but with a specific helpless clarity. She can see the wall. She can see what is behind it, or at least the shape of it, and she wants him anyway. What develops between them begins with an agreement. Miles makes it plain from the beginning. He can offer her this, the physical, the present, the right now. He cannot offer her more. He will not. She is not to ask him about his past, not to expect a future, not to fall in love. Those are the terms. She accepts them. And for a while, a version of that arrangement holds, until it does not, until it was never going to. Because Hoover is not writing a story about an arrangement that works. She is writing a story about why those arrangements always cost more than they were priced at the beginning. About why two people can agree to something with the rational parts of their minds, while the rest of them, the deeper, older, less governable parts, proceed according to entirely different terms. Now we go to the heart of it. The central question of Ugly Love is not whether Tate and Miles will end up together. The central question is what is inside Miles Archer that has made him decide he does not deserve to. Because that is what it is. Not that he cannot love, not that he is incapable. People who are incapable of love do not carry themselves the way Miles carries himself, with that specific, exhausted, careful heaviness of someone who has loved enormously and has decided, as a result, never to do it again. The book moves between two timelines. The present Tate and Miles, the arrangement, the slow and inevitable unraveling of the terms they agreed to. And the past, Miles, 6 years earlier, at the beginning of something that the reader pieces together page by page, chapter by chapter, like assembling a photograph from fragments. The past chapters are written differently, shorter, simpler, with a lightness and an openness that stands in devastating contrast to the Miles of the present. We watch him fall in love for the first time. We watch him become, briefly, completely, heartbreakingly, the person he was before whatever happened next. The person who could want things, who could imagine a future, who could say the word love like it was not a wound. And then we watch the thing happen that changed everything. Hoover structures this with tremendous skill. The slow revelation of Miles's past is calibrated to land with maximum impact, not as a plot twist, but as an emotional reckoning. By the time we understand what happened, we understand him. Not just his damage, him, the specific person who was formed by that specific loss in that specific moment. And understanding him does not make the present version of him less painful. It makes him more so. Tate, meanwhile, is doing what people do when they have agreed to a dynamic that is slowly breaking them. She is renegotiating with herself, finding ways to stay, finding justifications, telling herself she is fine, she knew what this was, she is not the kind of person who gets hurt by arrangements she agreed to with full information. She is that kind of person. We are all that kind of person. Hoover writes one of the book's most quietly devastating observations through Tate's perspective. She describes the specific grief of loving someone who is right in front of you and completely unreachable. The loneliness of being in the room with a person who has left all the lights on but locked every door. You can see everything. You can touch nothing real. And then, it is one thing to fall in love with someone's potential. It is another thing entirely to fall in love with someone's wound. And the difference matters, because one of those loves asks the other person to grow, and the other asks them only to be seen. Tate loves Miles's wound. She loves him through it. And that love is real. And that love is also not enough by itself to heal anything. That is the difficult, unglamorous truth this book is built on. Let us talk about what this book is really saying. The first great theme is the lie of the clean arrangement. Tate and Miles agree to rules at the beginning. Don't ask about the past. Don't expect a future. Don't fall in love. These rules are stated clearly, accepted consciously, and comprehensively violated, not through carelessness, but through the simple biological and emotional reality that human beings cannot be in sustained, intimate proximity with someone they are drawn to and maintain the agreed-upon distance indefinitely. Hoover is not saying the arrangement was stupid. She is saying it was human. That we make these agreements because we want the warmth without the risk, and we almost always discover that warmth and risk are not separable. That the thing that makes intimacy feel like intimacy is exactly the thing that makes it capable of devastating you. You cannot have one without the other. The attempt to extract them, to take the good parts and leave the dangerous ones behind, is one of the oldest and most understandable mistakes people make. The second great theme is what grief does to desire. Miles is not withholding because he is cold. He is withholding because the last time he was fully open, fully present, fully willing to want something, he lost it in a way he has never recovered from. His no is not indifference. It is the scar tissue of a yes that cost everything. This is one of the most important things the book does. It refuses to let Miles be a romantic obstacle or a puzzle to be solved. It insists on him as a person whose damage has a specific origin and a logic that is completely coherent given what he went through. His walls are not arbitrary. They are load-bearing. And asking him to take them down is asking him to risk the structural collapse of everything he has built in their place. That does not make it acceptable to offer someone a diminished version of yourself indefinitely. The book is honest about that too, but it makes it comprehensible. And comprehension, in Hoover's world, is always the beginning of the only kind of love that actually helps anything. The third great theme is the question of whether we can be loved back to life. This is the most delicate and the most contested of the book's ideas, because the narrative arc of Ugly Love is, in one reading, the story of a love that heals. That Tate's sustained, patient, non-demanding presence eventually creates enough safety for Miles to open the door he has kept closed for 6 years. And the book earns that. It earns it through the care with which it builds both characters, through the genuine understanding it extends to Miles's damage, through the slow and costly process of Tate coming to understand that loving someone is not the same as saving them. But Hoover is also honest about the price Tate pays, about how much of herself she spends in the waiting, about the specific erosion of someone who loves generously and is not loved generously back, even temporarily, even by someone who is doing the best they can. That erosion is real. It matters. And the book does not pretend it does not happen. Now let us look at these characters as people. Tate Collins is, in some ways, the most underestimated character in the book, because she is presented initially as the clear-sighted one, the one who knows what she is getting into, who is not deluding herself, who has her eyes open. And so when she begins to feel more than she agreed to feel, there is a temptation to read it as weakness or failure of will. It is neither. It is what happens when a generous, emotionally intelligent person spends sustained time with someone whose need is visible and whose depth is real. Tate does not fall in love with Miles despite understanding him. She falls in love with him because of it, because she sees him, the present version, damaged and defended, and the past version, open and luminous, and she understands that they are the same person, that the wall is not who he is. It is what happened to him. Her greatest strength is also the thing that costs her most. She is capable of enormous patience. She is capable of loving someone who cannot fully receive it. These are not small capacities. They are also, if exercised without limit, a form of self-erasure. The book understands this. It asks Tate to understand it too. Miles Archer is one of Hoover's most interior characters. The past chapters give us access to a version of him that the present Miles has essentially buried. A young man of enormous capacity for love, for hope, for the specific kind of tenderness that comes from wanting something so much you can feel it physically. We fall for that Miles, and then we watch what happens to him. His present self is not a diminished person. He is a protected one. Everything he is in the present, the competence, the self-sufficiency, the careful warmth that goes only so far, is a structure he built deliberately to make sure he could survive. Survival is not nothing, but it is not the same as living, and the book asks whether he will ever be willing to find out if the difference is still available to him. The symbol at the center of this book is contained in its title, Ugly Love, not beautiful love, not romantic love, not the version that looks good in photographs or sounds right when you describe it to a friend. The version that is inconvenient and costly and arrives at the wrong time in the wrong form with impossible terms attached. The version that makes you less comfortable, not more. The version that asks something of you that you are not sure you have left to give. Hoover is arguing, gently, persistently, from every angle, that this version is still love, that its ugliness does not disqualify it, that the mess and the damage and the one-sided seasons of it do not make it less real, and that sometimes the people most worth loving are the ones who have been so thoroughly broken by love that they have forgotten it is something they are still capable of surviving. What has this book done in the world? Ugly Love arrived in 2014 to immediate and passionate response. It became one of Hoover's fastest-selling novels, carried by readers who passed it to friends with the specific urgency of people who had seen themselves in it. Not in the romance exactly, but in the arrangement. In the experience of wanting more than was on offer, of knowing better and proceeding anyway, of sitting with the specific loneliness of loving someone who is right there and not there simultaneously. It found its second enormous wave of readers in the book talk years, when a new generation discovered it and responded with the same visceral recognition. The past timeline, in particular, became something readers discussed with the intensity usually reserved for real events. The question of what happened to young Miles, parceled out slowly across the novel, became one of the most discussed reveals in contemporary romance fiction. The book was adapted into a film in 2023, which introduced it to yet another audience and reignited conversation about whether the central arrangement was romantic or troubling or both. That conversation is worth having. The book itself seems to welcome it. It does not ask you to approve of every choice its characters make. It asks you to understand them. And understanding is not endorsement. It is something more useful than that. Now let me be honest with you. Ugly Love is not Hoover's most structurally complex novel. It is not attempting the narrative ambiguity of Verity or the social weight of it ends with us. What it is attempting is something more intimate, and in some ways more difficult, the honest portrayal of a specific emotional experience that most people have had and almost nobody talks about accurately. The dual timeline structure is its greatest technical achievement. The contrast between past Miles and present Miles does work that no amount of direct explanation could accomplish. We understand his damage not because we are told about it, but because we have seen what he was before it. That before is what makes the after devastating. Where the book occasionally strains is in the middle sections, where the arrangement is simply being lived rather than examined, where pages pass in the rhythm of a dynamic that the reader can already see is unsustainable, before the narrative moves to force the reckoning. For some readers, this creates necessary tension. For others, it creates impatience. And the resolution, which is earned, which is genuinely earned, requires the reader to accept a specific kind of healing that not everyone will find realistic. Whether one person's patient love can reach someone who has truly closed themselves off is a question this book answers optimistically. Real life does not always agree, but real life is not always the standard by which fiction should be measured. Sometimes fiction is permitted to show us the version we need to believe is possible. Who should read this book? Anyone who has ever loved someone more than they were loved back and kept going anyway. Anyone who has ever made an agreement about feelings and then discovered that feelings do not honor agreements. Anyone who has sat with the specific frustration of a person who is clearly capable of depth and has chosen, for reasons you understand but cannot accept, not to extend that depth to you. Read it if you have ever been Miles. Read it if you have ever been Tate. Read it if you suspect, honestly, that you have been both at different points in your life and to different people. Who should approach with care? If you are currently in an arrangement that is costing you more than you agreed to pay, this book will name that experience with uncomfortable precision. Be ready for that. Be ready to sit with the recognition it produces without immediately knowing what to do about it. We reach the end. Colleen Hoover wrote Ugly Love as a tribute to the kind of love that does not photograph well. The kind that happens in hallways at 2 in the morning, and in silences that last too long, and in the space between what someone says they can offer and what you can feel them wanting to offer if only they were not so thoroughly convinced that wanting things leads only to their loss. The title is the thesis. Love is not always beautiful. It is not always clean or convenient or kind to the people experiencing it. Sometimes it is the thing that finds you when you are least equipped to receive it, wearing a face you recognize from a dream you cannot quite remember, asking for terms you know you should not accept. And you accept them anyway, because the alternative is not loving, and you are not built for that. Because some people arrive in your life, and the word no becomes a physical impossibility, regardless of what your better judgment is doing. Because loving someone imperfectly, asymmetrically, at cost to yourself, is still one of the most human things there is. Miles Archer spends 6 years convinced that the version of himself who was capable of love died with everything he lost. The book argues otherwise. The book argues that grief is not the end of the capacity for love. It is, in its way, proof of it. that you cannot grieve what you did not love, that the wound is the shape of what was there, and that the same person who was broken open by love once is the same person who, given the right conditions and enough time and someone willing to stay, can be broken open again. Not into the person they were before, into someone new, someone who has been through the fire and knows its temperature and chooses, anyway, to let something warm again. That is not a small thing. That is not an ugly thing. That is the whole point.